Time to face it, 5 of these bands really need to retire, but the other 5, they've still got it. Kicking things off, we have Amon Amarth. So throwing on a classic Amon Amarth album is always a good time. I even know people who don't listen to metal at all who can enjoy their particular brand of Viking metal. And no doubt they are great live performers. But there's been a clear decline in quality over the last few albums, which I would argue starts around Jomsviking, but others would say goes all the way back to Deceiver of the Gods. Berserker is honestly pretty terrible, and while I'd say that the Great Heathen Army is better, it's only by degrees. They've gone from transporting me to ancient lands and grand imagery of Nordic lore to picturing a bunch of aging bearded dudes phoning it in the studio.
Dirty, bearded men in a room.
Now counter that with Polish thrash-infused death metal band Vader. Not only do these guys also possess timeless classics like De Profundis, Litany, and Impressions in Blood, they continue to drop some of their best material with the same level of energy with the likes of Tibi et Igni and Solitude in Madness. They can be a little hit and miss, but it seems clear that the vitality is still there and they haven't forgotten how to bring that hellfire. Next up we have 6 Feet Under.
Pick up the pieces of my destruction.
Now, in my opinion, this band probably never should have existed to begin with, but like I always say, if you dig their music, that's totally cool by me, and I think we can at least agree that beyond the initial albums, things fall off a cliff very quickly, with Nightmares of the Decomposed still holding the spot for one of the worst major label released albums I've ever heard. Like, holy shit, these vocals.
How embarrassing.
And in my book, the worst death metal band overall by a long shot. Contrast that with a band like Napalm Death. Who I argue are a band that only get better and better with every passing release. Not only did they set the blueprint for grindcore with Scum and From Enslavement to Obliteration, they survived the 90s and only grew their audience with Fear, Emptiness, Despair, and then went on to drop some of their most innovative and jaw-dropping material yet with Utilitarian and especially Throes of Joy in the Jaws of Defeatism, which was easily one of the best albums of 2020.
Just hook it to my veins!
Like, honestly, Napalm Death should be the benchmark for what every band should strive for being in their later years. Very few bands accomplish this level of experimentation, even in their best work in their early years, let alone this many decades into their career. Their music is exciting, it keeps me on my toes, and honestly, it still brings the energy of most bands with members in their 20s. I don't know how they do it, but we could all learn a lesson from Napalm Death. Also, just a reminder here that this is all just my personal opinion, and you can let me know down in the comments which bands you disagree with and why. Just give me a solid argument instead of just saying, "That's a cringe mask, bro." Although if that's the best you can come up with, by all means comment that too, because it's all the same to the YouTube algorithm.
You have no power here.
Following that up, we have a bit of a sad one here with Architects. So for a while, Architects were among my favorite metalcore bands. I can enjoy everything from their early material to when they really hit their stride with the more trademark djenty sound of the fantastic Lost Forever, Lost Together, which continues to be one of my top go-to metalcore albums. It seemed like they were at the top of their game, following that up with All Our Gods Have Abandoned Us, but then tragedy struck with the death of guitarist and key songwriter Tom Searle. Since then, Holy Hell signaled a moderate decline before For Those That Wish to Exist saw them making a transition to what I coined as Imagine Dragons core.
Not quite my tempo.
And honestly, I could have lived with that even if it wasn't my cup of tea, but with the release of Tear Gas, it seems clear that without Tom, there is no Architects. That may be a bitter pill to swallow, but personally, I'd rather see these musicians move on to other projects rather than drag their name through the mud. Now on the flip side, we have Groan if you want to, since I know this band can be divisive to talk about, but it's hard to argue their impact on the genre and level of consistency. And if you ask me, these guys have not dropped a single, even mediocre album, starting strong with the self-titled debut and only expanding and improving their songwriting and performances all the way to Periphery 4 Hail Stan. Who else in the genre has the balls to open their latest album with a nearly 17-minute progressive opus and then also drop some of their heaviest songs yet in Blood Eagle and Church Burner? Then we need to talk about Dark Funeral. Now, I know people who love this band, but the vast majority of black metal fans I know have turned this band into a bit of a punching bag. They've never truly been terrible, but walking through their full discography for the tier list, it became clear that even their best albums are only about on par with most of their peers' mid-tier albums. I personally find them to be pretty bland and forgettable, with the latest release, We Are the Apocalypse, being yet another prime example. I probably listened to that album at least 10 times in preparation for the review, but since then I've had no drive to return to it and can't remember a single note. Props at least to the current drummer Jan, but his talents are much better utilized in his various other projects like Imperium and Nightcrowned. The obvious counterpoint to this one is Watan. Now, Watan admittedly have also had their own middling moments, but overall they've been able to please black metal fans, first hitting big with Cassus Luciferi and Sworn to the Dark, and following that up with the also popular Lawless Darkness.
Hey, that's pretty good.
Opinions on the Wild Hunt and Trident Wolf Eclipse were much more split, but I think they've really rallied with the agony and ecstasy of Watan. Quite honestly, I actually think it may be their best album to date, balancing what made them great to begin with alongside new, more successful experimentation. And then we have to end on a massive one here with Iron Maiden. Time to piss off a lot of people, but I'm doubling down on what I said at the end of my Iron Maiden discography tier list. In the present day, I think that Iron Maiden is one of the most overrated bands in existence.
How dare you?
And I've surprisingly seen a lot of comments agreeing with me on that. Now, that's not to minimize their importance to the initial foundation of heavy metal to begin with, or the power of classic albums like The Number of the Beast and Power Slave. But basically, since the 90s, their output has been average at best, and I know Brave New World gets listed as an exception, but even that was over 20 years ago now.
Don't ask questions. Just consume product and then get excited for next products.
Like anyone else here, by all means keep touring until you don't want to anymore, but just stop making new albums. It all just sounds so tired to me. And while I'm of the opinion that most bands from this era should retire, I am as shocked as you may be right now to counter with Halloween. This band has now put out albums in 4 different decades, well enough for most to start just phoning it in. But I have to admit that their 2021 self-titled album featuring all 3 of their vocalists from over the years kind of blew me away. It's not something I can listen to all the time, but it's by far one of the best modern releases from a legacy act I've ever heard.
I am shocked! Shocked! Well, not that shocked.
I can only hope to still rock this hard when I'm pushing 60. Let me know which bands you think should and should not retire down in the comments. Check out this video for part 1 or this playlist for my most overrated metal albums. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.